When it comes to filing Form 8Ks, current reports, one of the biggest challenges is filing 8Ks that are required under Item 502E, the disclosure of compensatory events. It's a challenge because these 8Ks must be filed with the SEC on a dime within 4 business days, and you don't get ample time like you do when you file a proxy statement to consider what you want to say. Compensation arrangements can be sensitive. Nor do you get the opportunity to place these compensation arrangements in full context like you do in a proxy, since these 8Ks don't have a CD&A. Today on Zippy Point. I'm Brock Romanek. I'm a big fan of use. So for this Vid-Guide, we're going to focus on item 502E. However, 2 other sub-items of 8K, when a new senior officer is hired or when a new director is appointed, do elicit compensation disclosure also. I have separate Vid-Guides for those circumstances. So who is covered under this 502E trigger? A Form 8K is required when the company enters into, adopts, or otherwise commences a material compensation or plan, contract, or arrangement, whether it's oral or written, as to which the company's CEO, CFO, or named executive officer, an NEO, is a party. I have a separate Vid-Guide about how you determine who your NEOs are, whether or not in connection with another event that would trigger disclosure under 8K, or when a company material amends a plan. So that's a mouthful, but that's in the rule. So all the NEOs are covered, and you determine those by looking at the most recently filed proxy. However, disclosure is always required for a principal executive officer or a principal financial officer, even if they were not in those positions in the last proxy, so they've been hired since then. The trigger date varies depending on the type of compensation arrangement you have. If it's an agreement between the company and a specific officer, the trigger for the 8K filing is when the officer signs the agreement. If it's a material salary increase, the trigger is typically considered that date when the board or the compensation committee approve the hike, even when the new salary goes into effect at a later date. And if it's an equity compensation plan or a cash bonus plan that requires shareholder approval, the filing obligation is not triggered until shareholder approval is received, not when the board approves the plan, as noted in this pair of CorpFin staff interpretation. These CorpFin staff interpretations are key because that allows the company to delay disclosing the terms of these plans until the proxy statement, when it can be put in full context with the CD&A with the other disclosures in the proxy. So what types of compensation plan and arrangements are covered by 502E? And this can be a little tricky, including evaluating what is a material amendment or modification. So let's run down a few examples. Adoption of a new equity compensation plan, even if no awards are made at the time, it's a disclosable event, it's a trigger. Adoption of a new cash bonus plan does trigger a reporting obligation, does require an 8K, even if no specific performance criteria, no performance goals or bonus opportunities are communicated to plan participants at the time. Disclosable. The board's adoption of specific performance goals and business criteria under a plan, that's not considered a disclosable material amendment, so long as the goals and criteria are materially consistent with previously disclosed terms of the plan, according to these 2 CorpFin staff interpretations. I note that these are important interpretations, the previously disclosed exception, because the practical result is that if a plan is drafted to include a suitably broad and flexible range of criteria, and the plan is properly disclosed at the time of adoption, no 8K will be required when the compensation committee subsequently establishes specific performance targets or approves payment or distributions of awards upon achievement of the targets. That's because these actions are materially consistent with the previously disclosed terms of the plan. For the purposes of satisfying this previously disclosed exception, you're going to look at your proxies, your 10Ks, your 10Qs, registration statements to see what has already been disclosed, what's in your SEC reporting stream. Let's contrast two somewhat similar situations. Paying out awards after determining that the performance criteria has been satisfied. That's not a disclosable material amendment. Paying a performance bonus even if the performance criteria has not been satisfied. That is a disclosable material amendment. So the difference here is paying out awards versus paying a performance bonus. Awarding performance bonuses in the absence of required performance, a disclosable material amendment, even if prior disclosures had indicated that the plan allowed the company to exercise discretion to do this. Receipt of an ad hoc bonus, not disclosable per this CorpFin staff interpretation. Routine salary increases or drops in salary, not disclosable if considered routine, but special raises or cuts may warrant a AK. It might be a trigger. Adopting a clawback policy, not disclosable because it's a policy. Termination of a compensation plan. It's likely disclosable if you consider it a material modification according to this Corp Fin staff interpretation. Note that terminations of executive compensation plans should be reported under Item 502E under 8K rather than in Item 102 8K. Instruction 3 to Item 502 allows companies to omit disclosure for broad-based plans that don't discriminate in scope, terms, or operation in favor of the company's executive officers or directors. However, the non-discrimination test here in this instruction is narrowly construed, so it doesn't allow companies to exclude disclosure about many of their plans, the ones where outsized awards are typically granted to officers and sometimes directors. All these scenarios are fact intensive, and there are literally dozens and dozens more of them that have to be evaluated based on their own particular circumstances. What to disclose? Item 502E requires a brief description of the terms and conditions of the plan or arrangement and the amounts payable under it. You can, when consistent with General Instruction B3 to Form 8K, cross-reference a description from the company's most recent 10K or proxy. However, this is not permitted for material amendments, grants, or awards. A brief description contemplates a summary, not a mere recitation of the terms. It has to be usable. It has to be understandable. And incorporation by reference to an exhibit doesn't cut it either. It doesn't satisfy this requirement. You don't have to disclose performance criteria that involves trade secrets or confidential financial information in an 8K if that disclosure would result in competitive harm to the company according to this Corp Fin staff interpretation. I almost forgot to talk about the exhibits to these 8Ks. General Instruction B4 to Form 8K specifies that copies of agreements, amendments, or other documents are not required to be filed with the 8K unless specifically required. And then Item 9.01D, incorporating the requirements of Item 601B10 of Regulation SK, does not require the filing of compensatory plans, contracts, or arrangements with an 8K. So you get a pass here, except that under Instruction 2 to Item 601B10 of SK, any exhibits required to be filed under 601B10.3 must be filed with the periodic report that relates to it. So it would be the Form 10Q or the Form 10K covering the period during which that plan or agreement is executed or becomes effective. So in effect, you would have to file your new compensatory arrangement in the next 10Q or 10K for the period covered of when that agreement was signed, or you could just file it as an exhibit to the 8K, not have to hassle remembering it to file it with the 10Q or 10K, which many companies do. So what many companies do is that they do go ahead and voluntarily file the new arrangement with the 8K, and then when the next 10Q or 10K comes up, it's already been filed, so they just have it in the exhibit index, and they just cross-reference the 8K that was recently filed with that agreement. So this area can be confusing. Like I said, there are dozens and dozens of examples, so you're going to have to just go with your particular facts. This Vid-Guide is just an introduction. Let me know what you think.